Tonight on Primetime, the conflict between Washington and Tehran is intensifying. A wave of strikes hit targets across Iran, while missiles and drones are being launched across the Gulf and wider region. Casualties are mounting and new fronts are beginning to emerge. A widening conflict with global stakes. Well, very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. Fighting between Washington and Tehran is widening, with fresh strikes reported across the region in the past 12 hours. Both sides say they are acting in self-defense as the death toll rises and global markets react.
Israel has launched a wave of strikes inside Iran, targeting missile sites, defense systems, and military infrastructure. Iranian media report fresh explosions in Tehran, while the Iranian Red Crescent says at least 787 people have died since the fighting began, including up to 168 at a girls' school in Manab. Iran has retaliated for a fourth night, firing missiles near the U.S. Embassy in Dubai and at a port in Fujairah. The Revolutionary Guard says it also struck a U.S. base in Bahrain. Saudi Arabia intercepted 2 cruise missiles over Al-Kharj.
Over the past year and a half, we have heard a great deal of deceptive information, but now it is time to fight and defend our country. And anything that attempts to distract us or lead us astray will be rejected. Deception has always been part of our enemy's modus operandi. Our armed forces have sworn an oath, and the Iranian people have pledged to give their all to win this war.
U.S. President Donald Trump said American forces joined Israel's assault to prevent a first strike by Tehran.
Based on the way the negotiation was going, I think they were going to attack first, and I didn't want that to happen. So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand, but Israel was ready and we were ready, and we've had a very, very powerful impact because virtually everything they have has been knocked out now. Their missile count is going way down.
The Pentagon confirmed 4 American soldiers were killed in a drone attack in Kuwait on March 1st. A young girl also died from shrapnel injuries, and at least 3 others have been killed since the fighting began. In Lebanon, an Israeli air raid hit a residential complex in Baalbek, killing at least 4 and wounding 6. Thousands have been displaced. In western Iraq, an airstrike targeted a site used by pro-Iranian armed groups. The escalating conflict across Iran, the Gulf, and neighboring regions is disrupting global trade and sending energy markets sharply higher.
Well, joining us first tonight is our Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkan Amashov. Orkan, very good as always to see you. Strikes reported across Iran yet again, and the Gulf, and even slightly further beyond that. There's clearly been another sort of shift in the conflict, but how are you making sense of this?
Well, I think that one thing which is very clear, and that particular moment will intensify from now on, is the scope of the conflict. That scope of the conflict is very different to what was happening during the 12-day war. It's widening, with other actors being, whether they like it or not, being sort of drawn into that kaleidoscope that is being observed now. Turkey, of course, naturally, is not a natural target for Iran, but by mistake, Iranians targeted, not initially targeted, but effectively NATO forces needed to intercept those missiles coming from the Iranian side. Probably, I imagine, on the basis of the trajectory, they were aiming some American bases in Iraq or Syria. Well, that shows to you, Guy, the unpredictability which is associated with it. Because basically, we all understand that Islamic Republic of Iran, under the circumstances, is not supposed to target Turkey. Turkey has been from the very beginning against this military action against Tehran, condemned it, but they, by mistake, targeting countries which are actually friendly countries. So from this, it emerged with elegant inevitability. Nothing is basically unthinkable in the context of the unfolding situation.
Nothing is unthinkable. What about the legalities of this? You're, amongst other things, an international lawyer. Both sides blaming each other. Where does the international law stand? How does international law interpret the situation at the moment?
One of the reasons why UK, Government of United Kingdom and Great Britain, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, has not joined offensive strikes because there was a legal advice given to Prime Minister Keir Starmer that the war is not legal. There are some fundamental problems. You can invoke Article 51 of the UN Charter, which is related to self-defense, but that threat coming from Iran should be imminent, should be overwhelming, and should require immediate action. What US State Secretary Marco Rubio said earlier, effectively yesterday, Americans knew that the Israelis would strike Iran and Iran would immediately retaliate against the United States. Therefore, they took a preemptive action. Well, this creates a very interesting debate. If Israelis are attacking Iran, they're attacking for their own reasons. They believe that Iran is a danger. But to what extent we can be absolutely sure that Iranians would have retaliated against US bases or not? So that's it's a moot area. It's a grey zone. But basically, there are those amongst legal scholars who would defend US position. But overwhelmingly, if this matter is adjudicated by International Court of Justice, I'm absolutely sure legality would not. The argument in favor of legality would not be supported. The facts on the ground must change, and this entire legality debate goes to the very heart of the international legal order subject, because that order is collapsing. We don't have an effective deterrent.
Well, it's a very good point. I mean, I heard Mr. Trump talk about not needing permission to land on Spanish territory recently. You know, he said if we want to land, we'll just land. You know,
but actually, to the extent to which the international law and the network of obligations connecting binding these countries is no longer as effective and as tangible and worthwhile as it was once in the past. This is effectively might is right policy. Iran is a danger to us. The danger is definitely emanating from there. It's a source of evil, and we need to deal with it one way or another. That's American argument. This is supported by Israel, but no one is saying that Iran is a benign creature, an entity there. There are many problems associated with it, but if you want to act in line with international law, you need to have international consensus. But that takes us to the subject of UN Security Council, the permanent members. The structure there is based on the notion that all great powers should come to a consensus whilst dealing with a subject somewhere across the globe. Naturally, you can't legitimately expect, nobody can legitimately expect Russia and China supporting US attacks on Iran. So this takes us to a completely new debate. Lawyers, the learned scholars of international law, international public law, international humanitarian law could deliberate on whether that was legal, whether indeed there was an imminent threat forcing US to act preemptively. We can debate it, but the reality and the sad reality is that this has very little bearing upon the facts on the ground, and therefore perhaps we should move into the facts on the ground.
And humanitarian crisis, or can obviously, tragically, there have been deaths, injuries, some displacement already, inevitably. What's your understanding of the latest situation when it comes to the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding, and where do you think it could go in the coming days and weeks?
But one particular geography to look at is the Gulf region, because as I mentioned to you whilst we were conversing regarding this matter this morning, that region, which has been historically over the past decades been labelled as a safe hub, the safe zone, flourishing and prospering, despite being in the Middle East, is now caught between what the analysts from Carnegie Endowment described it, between US recklessness and Iran despair. US recklessness means that when you are beginning a military operation, in this particular case, joint military operation against a country like Iran, which is incredibly resilient for all of its failings, it's still very resilient. You need to gauge the outcome and repercussions. And one particular area wherein I think they have not necessarily evaluated possible outcomes is the Gulf region. That region is between Iran and Israel, naturally in between. There are US assets, so you would normally expect Iran retaliate against those assets. And bearing in mind Iran's technology and tendencies and so forth, those retaliations were not merely aiming at those assets, but also as part of collateral damage, with debris falling into different residential areas, also ultimately, eventually, to the residential part of Dubai and so forth. So basically, these countries found themselves in a position where they They do not really properly defend themselves because they rely on the United States. But the escalation and further intensity of the conflict could force them, against their own initial original wishes, into acting in a retaliatory fashion and being involved in the war. And that could create a completely new picture. I don't think that Gulf countries are interested in military escalation in one form or another. To what extent they could be interested in the collapse of the Islamic Republic of Iran as such, I'm not entirely sure. They would like, I suppose, from the point of view of realpolitik, to have Iran, which is still the same Iran that we know today, run by IRGC and so forth, but considerably weakened and unable to exercise any international power protection. They want limit. The same applies to Turkey, and in many ways, same applies to this region from the context of Iran not being able to interfere with internal affairs of this region, I suppose. So that creates two options. Either Gulf countries will be forcing US to stop halt operations in order not to be the recipients of this collateral damage,
yes,
or alternatively go till the end and achieve the ultimate purpose.
Well, look, and let's come back to the Gulf countries in just a minute. We're just getting news in now of an Israeli strike on an Iranian compound containing reportedly some leading security officials. We'll bring viewers, obviously, up to speed on that as it happens. But what that does speak to is something we were talking about yesterday, which is this strategy of taking apart the apparatus of the states, not just the overt military targets, but also those individuals, those organizations involved in sort of retaining power and control on the ground.
Absolutely, Guy. It's a very interesting point. I think we should reflect on it with some dedication, some sort of penetrating into the key elements of it, because this is a war and international humanitarian law applies. Those figures, commanders of IRGC, those leading figures, they are military targets from the Israeli perspective. They killed the supreme leader. They killed more than 40 commanders of IRGC. And yesterday we heard the news that they were effectively targeted and hit one building in the Qum region of Iran, where according to initial reports, all the 88 members of the Assembly of Experts were supposed to be, but they were not there because they moved. This creates a completely new situation. If you're going to exterminate all the upper crust elites of Islamic Republic of Iran, who are you going to speak to? Are they going to aim at Ali Larijani, for example, influential Secretary of the National Security Council? Probably not. He's civilian but former IRGC commander. Are they going to aim at Abbas Araghchi, foreign minister? Probably not. Are they going to aim at President Pezeshkian? Well, they could potentially. He's part of the interim, but probably not. They need to speak to somebody who is reasonable. And they fully understand that if the regime there were to survive, it would need to retain its face, basically, its fundamental attributes. What we have noticed over the past few days, they effectively targeted so many individuals that now Iran's future is at stake. Who is in charge? This is the fundamental question. I don't think interim council is in charge. Officially, Chief of Justice, President Pezeshkian, and Ayatollah Arafi, if he hasn't died yet, because there were reports that he has been targeted by Israeli forces as well. Officially, they're in charge, but really, countries run by IRGC, by the commanders, which are dispersed throughout the country. So you've got one layer, IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a vital ingredient of the regime, the country. It keeps everything under control. And you got army, 100,000 troops, maybe more than 100,000 troops. You got Basij, which is a sort of undercover, the collection of undercover police. It's a massive organization, and they are operating between ordinary people. They are effectively spies between ordinary people, and that keeps the system under control. It is very difficult when you're speaking to Iranian people from Iran, basically, who come to this country, or you're speaking to them via other communication channels, getting information, what's happening there. You don't know who you're speaking to. You could well speak to spies who are trying to create a certain impression. Iran is deeply controlled nation, and it's very difficult to distinguish ordinary folk and those people who are operatives. This is one particular aspect. And second aspect now is that what will become of the Islamic Republic of Iran? I think it's a very important question. They have not killed the next supreme leader, who's probably going to be Mujtaba Ali Khamenei, son of the ex-supreme leader. And what kind of person is he? I think If he is going to be targeted, this will tell us about the intentions of US and Israel. Do they really want regime change eventually, or they not? I think there are two layers to what Israel and US, with all the difference between those two countries borne in mind. The one stage will be to debilitate the security apparatus of the nation to the extent that people will decide to take over their government. They're not going to take over the they're not going to topple Islamic Republic of Iran on behalf of Iranian people. They wouldn't, because for that you need ground invasion. You could create certain reactionary groups inside the country and reactionary in relation to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and could foment something. But that would not work, I think, because Iran is a massive country. Ground invasion is unthinkable. Therefore, what they can do, they can create the fortuitous ground in order for people to take over. But what is the national mood, public mood there? It's another, of course, question. I think we need to just very briefly reflect on the personality of Ali Khamenei's son. He, for very considerable time, was naturally close to his father. He was controlling the administrative body of the office of supreme leader. Basically, you can call it the sort of administration of supreme leader. So he is very well versed in nation's affairs. He is very well connected with IRGC. He's loved by commanders. He also got good connection with civilians, and he represents the hardline face of the Islamic Republic of Iran. He's not a reformist. You don't expect this person to conduct reforms, make Iran more palatable, more conducive to. Which is
sometimes an assumption that you can have when it's a younger leader that comes
he's
in.
Actually, relatively. I mean, he's young. He's in mid-50s. So he's bound to be young. Well, in politics, up to 65 is for young, as I'm sure you know. But he's a hardliner. It's more radical than his father. So if this gentleman is going to be first person of Iran, and he's allowed to stay there and survive and live, Iran will not be any better. I mean, not more conducive to Iranian, American Israeli interests than it was before. And many analysts who are privy to Iran's sort of traditional historical thinking and landscape are saying that there was always battle inside Iran's upper crust between what they call Qum, which is a region in Iran, Qom school, which is more sort of reformist, less reactionary to the Western interpretation of life, and this hardline IRGC people. And it looks like hardliners defeated the relative reformists. So I don't know what will become of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So my take, guys, is that if they aim at the Supreme Leader's son, Mujtaba Ali Khamenei, it means that they're really interested in regime change. If they do not aim at him, probably they don't have massive sort of contingency plan.
Very interesting indeed. That'll be a really key indicator for us to watch. Just very quickly, let's go back to those Gulf countries for a moment, if we can or can. If you're sitting in Dubai or Doha or Riyadh or in Bahrain, and you're trying to think through how to get out of this situation, your airspace has been all but shut down completely. You're despite being countries with very deep pockets, you're still taking huge commercial, economic hits as a result. And of course, to reopen airspace, you need to be sure, confident that things are dying down or getting better. That doesn't seem possible. What do you do? What's your move? Do you think about joining the fight? Do you threaten to join the fight? Or do you go the other way? Do you acquiesce? Do you give overtures to Iran and try and pull away slightly symbolically from the US? What's the chess move that they're going to be thinking about doing?
I think there are three options possible for Gulf countries, particularly for United Arab Emirates, which has borne the brunt of the latest developments, Iranian attacks. One option is wait and see, basically do not much, act in the spirit of self-defense, rely on United States security guarantees, and call for de-escalation. This is not a very proactive approach, but could be the reasonable thing to do in the short term, at least for the purpose of the coming days. Number two option, force United States to de-escalate in order to limit Iranian retaliatory moves. Third move is a radical move, not necessarily join the military action, but consolidate against Iran and deepen Iran's isolation and take steps bringing end of this conflict, which should be in the shape of Iranian defeat. I think the last one is more likely. It's an opportunity for Gulf countries to be more proactive, but I think for the coming days we will see wait-and-see policy. They're incredibly worried because I was in Morocco a couple of weeks ago in early February, and I was having a chat with my friends from London, and one of the arguments presented by one of my colleagues, who is a lawyer in London and actually in arbitration, basically told me that Dubai is incredibly fragile. It's got massive opportunities, but everything there, it does not have that sort of history in the first place. And certain things in this life, in particular when it comes to being a proper financial capital, you need decades to build that reputation. And that fragility about the Dubai has proven to be the case just a few days ago. It's incredibly fragile. So therefore they have to be seen resilient, but I think they will be moving between two options: wait and see for the time being without escalating anything, and but asking Americans to de-escalate, and themselves being more proactive. Because if the Islamic Republic of Iran is going to face certain end of the system, the new entity there, we don't know what will become of it, but naturally United Arab Emirates and other Gulf countries do not want a proper competitor from Iran. They don't want to see Iran, which will be Western friendly, key Israel ally, US ally, because that will diminish their own clout in the Gulf region. They will have a massive competitor across the Gulf region. Therefore, they want to see Iran weakened, but still alive.
Very interesting indeed, as always. Orkan, we thank you very much, and we know you'll be coming back in the coming days. Thank you very much. Okay, in Washington, President Donald Trump received German Chancellor Friedrich Merz at the White House. Discussions focused on the escalating situation in Iran, Ukraine, preserving its territory, and global tariffs.
US President Donald Trump hosted German Chancellor Friedrich Merz at the White House on Tuesday, thanking Berlin for its support amid the widening confrontation involving Iran. During an exchange with reporters, Trump claimed that most potential alternatives to Iran's supreme leader had already been killed.
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, you know, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group, they may be dead also, based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody.
Chancellor Merz said Berlin and Washington are on the same page when it comes to ending what he described as Iran's terrible terrorist regime.
We are supporting the United States and Israel to get rid of this terrible terrorist regime, and we are looking forward to a day after, and we have to talk about the strategy, what is following after this regime is away, and we have to strategize on this entire region.
Merz also urged the US to increase pressure on Russian President Putin over the Ukraine war, stressing that any lasting peace deal must have Europe's support. Trade was another key topic, with Berlin expecting future US tariffs on EU imports to stay within the 2025 trade deal limits. The meeting underscored the close, though sometimes cautious, alignment between Washington and Berlin on geopolitical and economic issues.
Out of this meeting, US President Donald Trump threatened to cut off trade with Spain, accusing it of being uncooperative over NATO spending and access to military bases. Well, his remarks came after Spain said it would not allow US forces to use jointly operated bases for strikes on Iran, not covered by the UN Charter.
Some of the European, like Spain, has been terrible. In fact, I told Scott to cut off all dealings with Spain. Spain, first of all, it started when every European nation, at my request, paid 5%, which they should be doing. And everybody was enthusiastic about it, Germany, everybody. And Spain didn't do it. And now Spain actually said that we can't use their bases, and that's all right. We could use their base if we want. We could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it, but we don't have to. But they were unfriendly.
Okay, joining us now is George Costa Oliveira, a political analyst who is with us, joining us from Lisbon in Portugal. Now, he's been closely following the latest developments in Washington, including the meeting between President Donald Trump and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and he brings insight into how transatlantic allies are navigating the widening Iran crisis, the war in Ukraine, and growing tensions within NATO. Mr. Oliveira, very nice indeed to speak to you. President Trump threatened to cut off trade with Spain. I mean, pretty dramatic stuff. How serious could this dispute become, do you think?
Never knows. Is it possible for the United States to target Spanish goods and services? Yes. Is it going to be easy? Probably not, because let's not forget that in terms of Europe, of the European Union better, the trade policy is a common policy. It's an European policy. So the negotiation is handled by Brussels, and for instance, in terms of tariffs, it wouldn't work. But is it possible to boycott goods that come in? Yes, it is possible. But I think that it's not going to be easy it's easier said than done. Let's see exactly how that will materialize. And the fact that Donald Trump also mentioned Scott Bassett, Secretary of the Treasury, and not the Secretary of Commerce, probably indicates that he still has not thought a lot about the issue.
Yeah, very interesting. And Spain says, of course, strikes must comply with the UN Charter. Interesting citing that, wasn't it? What do you think Sanchez is thinking here? Is this an appeal to his base supporters? Is it about positioning himself as a strong multilateralist? Or is it really just about being pragmatic and protective of his country?
Well, it's a bit of everything. And there's still more that you have not mentioned. Let's not forget that in the last months, Sanchez has been one of the main European leaders that has visited China and reinforced the relations between his country and China. And obviously, China is very interested also because of the influence that Spain still retains in other parts of the world, namely in Central and South America. So to a large extent, I believe that the posture of Sanchez, although it is not as fluid and vague as most European leaders, is actually welcomed by the European leadership, as we have seen in the last 24 hours. And I would say that it is probably going to continue to be articulated, therefore making Europe a kind of one of those divinities with two faces, a more soft face not to create, not to irate Donald Trump, but a stronger face reminding international law and reminding the United States that the Europeans will not do just anything that he wants.
Yeah, very interesting. We certainly saw a bit of a tough face, and from Mr. Trump and Mr. Merz during the meeting. Mr. Trump criticising Spain's defence spending. Mr. Merz then joining in to back that up. I mean, in terms of this frustration from Washington about NATO burden sharing, where are we at the moment, do you think?
Well, it's true that, first things first, Europe has not spent enough on its own defense, and in that regard, Trump is right. There's no other way to put it. And he was right already when he called for it in his first mandate. But it's true that this situation where Europe's defense was pretty much dependent on the United States military power is something that also always pleased the United States leaderships. So let's not be hypocritical and suddenly say, oh, Europe should have done something and they did not want to. Yes, I'm a strong believer in Europe strategic autonomy, including and starting with our own security. But on the other hand, the United States, the situation came from an arrangement that was convenient for both sides. Now, it is already clear that Europe needs to spend more money in defense. But also, let's be pragmatic. Obviously, it's not by chance that Poland is the country that already spends more in terms of the respective GDP. Poland spends already nowadays more than the United States in terms of its GDP in defense. And those countries that are close to Russia are going to continue to spend far more than countries like Spain or Portugal or Italy. We are not exactly on the front line, and therefore it's far more complicated to sell to public opinion and to the citizens that we should now cut social expenses and expenditure in other social areas in order to satisfy the needs of an European defense. Yes, it has to be done. Is it going to be done in two speeds? Yes, most likely, like many other areas in Europe. There's nothing new here.
I mean, where do you think this could go? Do you think tensions will escalate? You know, both sides seem to be digging their heels in, or is this really just a sort of a calculated short-term rebuff that really you think, to use a British expression, will be a bit of a storm in a teacup?
Well, I think we are looking at a discussion on secondary matters, and everybody's trying to avoid the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is not exactly if European countries will spend 3, 4, 4.5% of its GDP. The issue is how autonomous will Europe be in terms of the armament. For instance, several European countries are now buying jet fighters. Many of the military, they prefer to buy the F-35. Most politicians, I would say really most politicians in Europe, do not want to buy F-35s. And I'm pretty sure that as the discussion will go on, public opinion will be with them. What the heck, what do you want? Why do you want a top-notch airplane whose software is controlled by a button by the American leadership? So no, this will not happen for long. So for the time being, Europe is not saying it bluntly, but it is creating the pace to have its own weaponry, to create its own autonomy vis-a-vis other powers, namely the United States. Now, this poses a big problem. The problem is not Donald Trump, let's be clear. The problem is the biggest lobby in the United States for decades, the industrial military complex. So this is the real issue that is at stake here. And it's something that Europe is trying to navigate with very vague references, very ambiguous postures. But at the end of the day, this is the real issue on the table.
And you mentioned autonomy there, European autonomy, but what about cohesion within the bloc? Do you think there's a sense in which now we're starting to see some fragmentation, at least of thinking, when it comes to the issue of defence?
No, cohesion is important, and it's also in the NATO treaties. But I don't think that the divisive forces or the centrifuge forces that have taken place in the last 12 months started in Europe. I mean, the United States started a conflict with its own main neighbors and trade partners and members of the USMCA. So clearly, it is going to be very complicated to have more cohesion during the mandate of Trump. And seen from Europe, we cannot be sure, and I'm pretty sure the Canadians would subscribe this, we cannot be sure that after Trump, there will be someone very similar, because the electorate is completely split. I mean, he probably will lose the midterms, but even if he loses, I mean, when it comes to the general elections, nobody really knows. The U.S. is completely polarized, and half of the United States came back to the Monroe Doctrine. I mean, if you subscribe the Monroe Doctrine as a kind of a cover for a new imperialistic posture, I mean, you will never be able to convince your allies on the grounds of cohesion. Cohesion is gone, destroyed by the United States. Europe has to be worried about cohesion between itself, between its countries, and with its traditional allies, which are the rest of the West, starting with Canada. And that's what we have been seeing.
Very interesting
that is being clear.
Sorry, Mr. Olivier, we're just slightly out of time. We thank you very much indeed for your analysis. It's really great to have you on the show with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Katie Wilson. Stay tuned. A very warm welcome back to Primetime. Now, Katie Wilson has arrived with the very latest business news stories. Katie, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, it's a one-story day, Guy, as I'm sure you'd probably expect. So we're going to take a look at how the US and Israel's war with Iran is impacting the world of business and trade. Let's get started. Asian markets are under sharp pressure as fears of a widening Middle East war rattle investors. From Seoul to Tokyo, stocks, currencies and commodities are reacting to the risk of an energy shock, one that could reignite inflation and push back hopes of interest rate cuts.
Asian markets skated on Wednesday amid mounting concern over the impact of war in the Middle East. Investors are worried the conflict could deliver an energy shock that raises inflation and delays rate cuts. Shares in Seoul dived over 10% by lunchtime. Overseas investors were among those to bail out of a market that had soared on memory chip makers' vast AI-driven profits. The sell-off dragged the country's won currency to a 17-year low. In Japan, the Nikkei index slid around 4% in a third straight session of losses. Both it and South Korea are major energy importers, leaving them vulnerable to soaring prices. Benchmark Brent crude oil futures are up more than 14% for the week at around $83 a barrel. However, prices found some stability after U.S. President Donald Trump ordered an insurance guarantee on Gulf shipping and said the U.S. Navy might escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. and Israeli forces have pounded Iran for days, and Iranian drones and missiles have struck Gulf oil refineries and also U.S. embassies in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Earlier on Wall Street, index has spared heavy losses, but the S&P 500 closed 0.8% lower on fears of potentially prolonged higher oil prices. The euro fell below $1.16, as investors expect Europe will also be hit hard by higher energy costs. Gas prices in that region have jumped around 65% in 2 days.
Now let's take a closer look at South Korea, where markets tumbled to historic lows. Shares plunged 12%, the biggest one-day fall in nearly half a century, wiping out around $500 billion in value as fears grow that the war with Iran could hammer an energy-hungry economy.
Cars lined up at a petrol station in Seoul on Wednesday as South Koreans filled up their tanks amid rising global oil prices triggered by the war in Iran. South Korean shares sank 12% on Wednesday, posting their biggest drop in its 46-year history. It's wiped $500 billion in value just this week and comes as fears the Iran war could cripple Asia's fourth-largest economy sent the won to a 17-year low. Losses in South Korea's stocks far outweighed those seen elsewhere in Asia. The country is heavily reliant on Middle Eastern oil for its energy needs. South Korea is the world's fourth largest buyer of oil, and around 70% of its purchases come from the Middle East. Korean equities had been Asia's best performing, having doubled over the past year. But traders say that makes them particularly vulnerable to a capitulation. On the index, circuit breakers were activated for the first time since 2024, halting trading for 20 minutes. The losses marked an abrupt turn for a market that had rapidly outperformed global peers on an AI-driven rally.
Over to Wall Street now, where US stocks dipped on Tuesday due to worries the Middle East conflict could linger, though indexes recovered from sharper early losses. Gains in Pinterest and Target helped offset declines in other big names, including Blackstone.
U.S. stocks fell on Tuesday, with the Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ all dropping roughly 1% or less. Investors are concerned about the effect of the Iran conflict on inflation as oil prices extended sharp gains. Still, stocks came back from losses of more than 2% earlier in the day. That surprised Jed Ellerbrook, portfolio manager at Argent Capital Management, who expected to see a steep sell-off of the year's most volatile stocks, including shares of AI-related companies.
What we see instead is a rotation from the stocks that had performed best year to date. Those ones are worst today. And what's been worst over the first 2 months of the year are actually performing best today and this week. So software is at the top of the leaderboard today. And then you see some of those big year-to-date winners like the materials stocks, consumer staples too, not keeping up with the market. So it's a surprise. It's a surprising market reaction. I think really a fairly tame reaction to some really big geopolitical news.
Winners on the day included Pinterest. Shares of the image-sharing platform popped more than 9% after the company said activist Elliott Investment Management is investing $1 billion that would help fund a new $3.5 billion share buyback. The move marked a vote of confidence for Pinterest's efforts to tackle uncertain ad spending. Shares of Target gained nearly 7% after new CEO Michael Fidelki pledged to restore annual sales growth, betting on a plan to spend billions to turn around the struggling retailer. Blackstone, however, shed almost 4% after its flagship credit fund, BCRED, saw a surge in redemption requests.
Over to commodities now, and gold prices drifted lower on Tuesday, pressured by a stronger dollar and fading hopes for an interest rate cut. Even amid rising inflation and Middle East tensions, investors favoured cash over the precious metal. For now.
Gold prices drifted lower on Tuesday, weighed down by a stronger dollar and fading prospects of an interest rate cut, as inflation concerns intensified against the backdrop of a potentially prolonged Middle East conflict. One market strategist tells Reuters the more than 5% decline in gold appears to be driven by a flight to liquidity or cash, though he expects it to be short-lived. The U.S. dollar, a competing safe haven asset, rose to an over 1-month peak, and U.S. Treasury yields rose for a second consecutive session. Despite being considered a hedge against inflation and turmoil, gold is typically preferred in a low-rate environment as it yields no interest. Market watchers are also paying close attention to expectations for U.S. interest rates. Traders raised expectations slightly for tighter Federal Reserve policy, though they still expect 2 rate cuts this year, with the first in July. 2 Fed speakers Tuesday did not address Iran, but continued to express divergent views on the path of rates from here. Kansas City Federal Reserve President Jeffrey Schmidt on Tuesday signaled his continued opposition to further interest rate cuts, saying the U.S. labor market is in balance and inflation is too hot. While New York Federal Reserve President John Williams said on Tuesday that the U.S. Central Bank is on track for more interest rate cuts if inflation pressures moderate as he expects. Oil prices soared again on Tuesday as the air war in the Middle East widened, while U.S. stocks were down nearly 2% as investors feared a prolonged conflict.
Over to travel and aviation now, and airline stocks extended losses on Tuesday as the US and Israeli air campaign against Iran intensified. Carriers faced soaring fuel costs and widespread flight cancellations, leaving tens of thousands of passengers stranded across the Middle East.
Airline stocks extended losses on Tuesday as the U.S. and Israeli air war against Iran escalated, with carriers monitoring spiking fuel prices and canceling flights. Shares of Delta, United, American, and JetBlue fell between 4.5% and 7%, with airlines across Asia and Europe also sliding. Tens of thousands of passengers were stranded in the Middle East and beyond, including at major hubs like Dubai, the world's busiest international airport. That's cost the airlines hundreds of millions of dollars in tourism and cargo revenue, said Paul Charles, CEO of the PC Agency, a luxury travel consultancy.
It's pretty well the biggest shutdown we've seen, certainly since the COVID pandemic. The growth of the Middle East has been phenomenal in the last few years, with people wanting to holiday there or move there or do business there. And we've seen the enormous growth, of course, of the main hubs like Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi. So when they are shut down, it has a significant impact not only on holidaymakers and business travelers, but also on cargo. And that has a major impact on the supply chain overall.
Jamie Brown was among the first tourists from the UK able to leave Dubai after catching an early morning flight that landed in London's Heathrow Airport on Tuesday.
It's been a tumultuous, traumatic time. And when you've got young children like this, it's just, you're hearing explosions go off above you. It's no way to live, and I feel really sorry for the people that are still out there. We're very lucky to be back home.
Aviation data firm Cirium said over 19,000 flights to the Middle East have been canceled since Saturday, while Tourism Economics said the conflict could lead to a $34 billion to $56 billion drop in visitor spending in the region this year.
And finally, it's somewhat better news for European travellers. Ryanair is seeing a surge in Easter bookings as people avoid the Middle East. CEO Michael O'Leary says short-haul trips across Europe are benefiting, and the airline doesn't expect major long-term disruption despite rising fuel costs.
Budget airline Ryanair has seen a surge in Easter holiday bookings to European destinations as travellers avoid the Middle East due to the escalating regional conflict.
I think lots of people and families changing their travel plans.
But CEO Michael O'Leary said on Tuesday he didn't expect a big longer-term impact. The war between the US, Israel and Iran disrupted flights worldwide. Key Middle Eastern hubs are closed and oil prices are surging, with analysts warning of weeks of disruption.
But I think there's no doubt that it has undermined confidence in air travel to the Gulf states. It has undermined confidence of people connecting through the Gulf states, and that might maybe for the remainder of 2026 be good for short-haul holidays or travel within Europe.
O'Leary said Ryanair's priority during the current disruption was to repatriate more than 3,000 customers from Jordan, where the airspace is closed.
But we don't think that can happen probably before this weekend coming. Would we make available aircraft to others for governments for repatriation? Yes, we'd certainly talk to them, but we don't have that many spare aircraft at the moment.
Oil prices are up roughly 30% so far this year due to the conflict, potentially driving up the cost of jet fuel and hurting airlines' profits. However, O'Leary said this would not affect Ryanair as it was well hedged against rising oil prices.
That's your business news roundup for the day. Back to you, Guy.
Great stuff, Katie. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll head to Cyprus, where allies are rushing to reinforce air defences after drones struck a British military base on the island, causing fresh concerns about the expanding reach of the Middle East conflict. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, Cyprus is receiving support from its allies after Iran made drones hit its British military base. After the US and Israel issued a number of strikes. Here's our correspondent with more.
Welcome to this day in Europe as France, Britain and Greece rushed to support Cyprus with air defense forces after drones hit a British military base on the island. Cyprus says an Iranian-made drone hit Royal Air Force Akrotiri while two others were intercepted. The drones were reportedly launched from Lebanon by Iran-backed Hezbollah. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer wrote on X that, quote, the UK is fully committed to the security of Cyprus and British military personnel based there. The country will deploy the HMS Dragon, along with two Wildcat helicopters equipped with Martlet missiles to reinforce Britain's defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. Government officials say the destroyer will help Britain detect, track, and destroy aerial threats, including drones. Meantime, in a televised address last night, French President Emmanuel Macron said France sent Cyprus the frigate Languedoc and that additional air defense assets are on the way. Greece also dispatched 4 F-16 fighter jets and 2 frigates, one equipped with the Centaurus anti-drone jamming system designed to detect and neutralize low-flying drones, including those flying close to terrain or skimming the sea surface. These deployments reflect growing concern over unmanned aerial threats targeting fixed military installations in a region increasingly shaped by hybrid and proxy conflict. RAF Akrotiri is sovereign British territory and sits next to civilian communities. Hundreds of residents fled after the island was abruptly caught up in escalating tensions following U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran and Tehran's retaliation. Drone warfare, now central on battlefields from Ukraine to the Gulf, is reshaping military force protection doctrines, but it also exposes vulnerabilities of seemingly well-protected military bases. For NATO and EU planners, the message is very clear. Air defense and counter-drone capabilities are no longer optional additions, but frontline requirements in a more volatile security environment. The biggest challenge now may be determining where the front line actually lies. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Well, as we've been hearing, this incident has triggered a rapid response from allies with Britain, France and Greece, all deploying naval and air defence assets to reinforce security in the Eastern Mediterranean. Well, joining us now to discuss the strategic implications is Mr. Leon Cook. He's the founder of Atticus Partners and he's joining us from London. Mr. Cook, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Prime Time. How significant is this drone strike on the RAF base then? And what do you think it reveals about the vulnerability of military bases in the Eastern Mediterranean moreover?
Good evening. I think that one drone landed on the runway on Sunday and probably would have set the cat amongst the pigeons within the Ministry of Defence in terms of how to respond to this. But the significance is it's not so much in the physical damage, about more what it represents. It is Iran absolutely testing the boundaries of NATO and those countries by which it thinks is allied to the cause of its destruction. Equally, Akrotiri is one of the UK's most strategically important overseas bases. It supports a lot of our operations in the Middle East and the Eastern Med. Therefore, any targeting of it is both symbolic as well as tactical. This is not about a single strike. It's about the threat envelope that they wish to pose towards us. And if you look at the scale of obviously Iranian operations across the Middle East, this is just the furthest envelope of that. I have to say that it does also cause quite a bit of consternation or questions to be asked about if one 20,000 pound drone, Shahed drone, can basically penetrate one of the UK's most strategic assets. What does that actually say about our ability to defend ourselves, let alone the island of Cyprus? So lots and lots of questions, I think, if you see in political debate on social media or even in the House, as to why the Prime Minister is so long to respond in the way which he has.
Yeah, as you say, lots of questions and lots of criticism for Keir Starmer from certain quarters. But on the other hand, Britain, France and Greece did respond reasonably quickly. How coordinated do you think this Western response has been to this new threat?
Well, I can totally understand the way the Greeks responded to this, bearing in mind the brotherly nation and relations with Cyprus. France, of course, wants to also, like the United Kingdom, showcase its defence capabilities. And also, if you think about this in the round, vis-a-vis NATO, a European Defence Force, the European Defence Fund, which is a topic of much discussion about who can get what. Therefore, them sending a destroyer into in the Med, there's also showcasing that they're ready. There is layered coordination at the larger European nations and or NATO, whether that be intelligence sharing, monitoring of airspace, maritime patrols. There is a dramatic escalation to how they respond to these things. I would, more often than not, the French work very well with each other, but these are British bases on Cyprus. They should be defended by British RAF, British frigates, British maritime. So the idea that they're not is incredibly problematic.
Yeah, and reports also suggesting that the drones may have been launched from Lebanon by Hezbollah. I guess the more you pick at this, the more problematic and stressful it gets for leaders like Keir Starmer, who are possibly trying to sort of step away, de-escalate, not really commit too strongly to this conflict.
Well, I think there is a legal precedent now for the UK to have retaliated, and earlier. So if you think about where this started, the United States asking to use bases in the United Kingdom to launch air operations and or even Chagos. Now, obviously, we saw what happened the Oval Office in terms of his condemnation of that decision by the British government and by Keir Starmer. I'd actually even say it's called a visible break in our special relationship, if that existed, with the United States. And yet, even a chicken that is going to be sent to the Eastern Mediterranean that won't even leave until next, therefore won't arrive for 2 weeks. That is an absolute lifetime in the context of a military operation. If you think then also coupled that against, the sheer air threat that is being posed at the rest of the Middle East, the sheer number of drones that are being launched and or way more serious missiles by Iran, the notion of us being asleep at the wheel is absolutely a credible one. There is no way that in a wartime scenario you can respond at this sort of tempo and be taken seriously. So they're questioning our mettle. They're demonstrating that we are not operationally ready. And I think come when the dust settles on this, there'll be very serious questions to answer.
And then if some of those serious questions require more spending, more budget, more infrastructure. I mean, drone warfare has become just central now, hasn't it, to modern conflicts. How on earth do you go about defending air bases when drones are so plentiful and so sort of seemingly easy to come by?
Well, if you think about warfare, Karabakh 2 was the first proper drone war. And Azerbaijan was very successful in that campaign because of the sheer number of Bayraktar drones that it was deploying against tanks and, taking them out of the operation on the battlefield. If you then think of the next evolution of what has happened in Ukraine, where 80% of their success on the battlefield or their ability to withhold Russia is through drones. The sheer scale and size of them, the tempo at which they can achieve that. This is the next evolution. There are, major defense exhibitions around the world now where half the hall is dedicated to drones because this is where modern warfare is moving and continues to do so. And then if you think about how you defend against that, so, the United States is using Patriot missiles to shoot down drones. These are, the cost of that versus what the cost of manufacture of drones just doesn't stack up really. And so I think you are definitely going to see a shift in a short-term life cycle for the United Kingdom. There is a £28 billion black hole that the Ministry of Defence is asking of that. If you replicate that across other European nations, NATO nations, there is very good reason why the President of the United States has been arguing for a 5% GDP spend on defense because of the threat level that is being posed by bad actors, be Russia or Iran. And drones are the articulation of that, the tip of the spear in terms of how those bad actors penetrate our defense mechanism shields.
And you mentioned before, Leon, that this notion that people have said about the UK potentially looking like they were asleep at the wheel. When you look at the UK, when you look at the EU, perhaps NATO too, is there a sense in the response that they haven't really got their story straight? That there's a not just in terms of the military response, but just in terms of the statements, the coordination. Do you think one of the lessons coming out of this will be that they'll need to shape up in terms of the speed and the coherence of the response to threats like this?
Well, one would like to think so, but we're into the year, the fifth year of a war in mainland Europe in Ukraine. So if they haven't done it by now, and the sheer loss of life that is being experienced there, I'm not sure whether this will shake the tree, so to speak. But I think that the difference between those two things is here we're talking about Cyprus with issues even closer to home. These are establishments of the defence capability of our country that are being attacked. And this is how we respond, or the speed at which we respond. The knock-on effects to this, everything that's happening in the Middle East is going to have a medium to long-term effect on energy prices. So we're all going to be worse off as a result of that. So this thing might resolve itself very, very quickly by sheer scale of how it's amplified, what the United States does next with its allies, or there might be a call for it all to come to an end, because when economies start to be threatened, whether that be in the Middle East and or our own, or our ability to actually deploy defense capability quickly, then questions are going to be asked, but I think there will definitely be an introspection after this immediate event.
Mr. Cook, great to have you on the show. Thanks very much for your analysis. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Okay, after the break, we'll turn to France, where President Emmanuel Macron is signalling a stronger nuclear deterrent as concerns grow that global conflicts could edge closer to the nuclear threshold. Don't go away. Welcome back to Prime Time. Turning to France, and President Emmanuel Macron has said it will increase the size of its nuclear arsenal and strengthen its deterrent with an increasing risk of conflicts globally crossing the nuclear threshold. Well, Macron also said a major change would see more cooperation with European allies. He added that Germany plus Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark would be able to take part in French nuclear war games.
Germany will naturally be a key partner in this effort, the most ambitious in the spirit of the Aachen Treaty. The first stages of cooperation will begin this year and may include visits to strategic sites and joint exercises. From now on, other countries have accepted this dialogue. And beyond our British and German partners and friends already mentioned, Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Sweden and Denmark will join it. This is a genuine strategic convergence between our countries of a nature to give real depth to the defence of our continent. As for our American allies, who themselves are modernising their arsenal, they have played since 1945 and will continue to play a key role in the defence of Europe. We are grateful to them for this. And in terms of deterrence, they participate directly in our protection with NATO's nuclear mission. But their recent national security and defence strategy shows a rearrangement of American priorities and a strong encouragement for Europe to take more direct care of its own security.
France then is signalling a major shift in Europe's security posture. President Emmanuel Macron says Paris will expand its nuclear arsenal and deepen cooperation with those European allies, even opening French nuclear war games to several partner countries. The move comes as concerns grow that global conflicts could move closer to that nuclear threshold, and as Washington urges Europe to take greater responsibility for its own defence. Well, joining us now to unpack what this means, what it could mean for Europe's deterrence strategy, is Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat from Rabat in Morocco. Ambassador, always good to see you on A News. Thanks very much for joining us. Now, President Macron says France will expand its nuclear deterrent. How significant is this shift, do you think, for Europe's overall security architecture?
It is a major turning point, and I think for the better. I have seen some very foolish analysis on both sides of the Atlantic. On the other side of the Atlantic, because they believe that this is really just a boasting show-off, and on this side of the Atlantic, because they think that it is a complete waste of money. Well, it's not. It's neither of these things. We have been always criticizing Europe because it is incapable of taking its security in its own hands. Europe has always spoken about strategic autonomy for about 20 or 25 years. And in these 25 years, we have done hardly nothing to be able to really intensify our readiness for defense in a very, very uncertain world. And we're seeing that when people say that armed forces are no longer necessary, that modern wars are not fought with fighter jets or tanks or infantry, they're completely wrong. They are complemented by the new technologies. You cannot defend yourself against drones, or you cannot defend yourself against enemy combat aircraft if you don't have drones. So, for example, the fact that the Ukrainians have been developing such a phenomenal anti-drone industry and drone industry is a great advantage, because actually all the European nations are taking advantage of this. But let's go back to the nuclear autonomy. We know that in the case of the United Kingdom, the nuclear forces of the United Kingdom have a certain link to the United States because the technology is American, the missiles are American, and in some ways it would be very that the United Kingdom could be able to launch some kind of defensive attack or counterattack, if you want to be more clear, without the United States giving their green light. This is not the case of France, and this has been stressed for the last, let's say, 6 months. And this is the reason why they began to speak very clearly about creating a stronger tie between France and the United Kingdom to maybe make the United Kingdom more autonomous vis-a-vis the United States. And the Germans have realized that it is impossible to be in the world today without proper deterrence. And deterrence has one name at the end of the game, which is, of course, unfortunately, nuclear deterrence. One more thing. You need to have a coherent speech when you talk about defense. Unfortunately, Europe doesn't have a coherent speech. We see that Germans and French are very tightly united in this new nuclear strategy, but they have recently broke up ties in the efforts to create or to look for a 6th generation fighter jet that would be produced by European technology. And it was going to be a joint venture between Germany, France, and Spain mostly. There's another effort that is going on as we speak, which is the British, Italian, and Japanese. Actually, if we want to be at the top of our game, we shouldn't be competing against each other. And recently, for example, the AG Metall, the most important, the most influential trade union, industrial trade union in Germany, has made it very clear that they don't want Germany to participate in any kind of consortium. They want Germany to produce their own plane. And let me tell you one thing. This project, for example, because it was joint, it was budgeted at 100 billion euros. If any given country would start a 6th generation fighter jet program, that would cost 400 billion euros. This is completely undoable.
Yeah, it sounds it. I think the total UK expenditure on defence is 60 billion UK pounds. So it really puts it into perspective. Michel Macron also invited several European allies to participate in nuclear war games. What do you think that signals about the future of nuclear cooperation in Europe?
Listen, again, we have to be coherent in our speech, as I said before, for another reason. As you recall, the last Saturday when the war in the Middle East, or call it the attacks against Iran and the counterattacks of Iran, happened, the message of President Macron was very different to what we are listening to today, when he said, we need to call an urgent meeting of the Security Council, and we need to de-escalate, and we need to be very cautious. But then, when British interests and French interests were touched, then he changed the speech, and he said, if we are not taken seriously and our interests are attacked, we will send a nuclear submarine, and one single French nuclear submarine can do more damage than the totality of the bombs that were dropped in the Second World War. Well, you can't be as soft as you were in the beginning and as harsh as you were later. There is a middle ground somewhere. You need to be prudent. You need to be cautious. You need to signal that you're very, very clear about deterrence and that you're not going to allow any potential enemy to step on your toes or to threaten you or your people, your interests or your allies. But to go as far as to say, when there has been no kind of indication that there is a nuclear threat against France, that you are willing to use a nuclear weapon, that is going a bit too far.
Ambassador, where is Germany in all this? I guess there's an expectation that they play a key role. I think treaties would support that. But we've heard Mr. Merz sitting next to President Trump lambasting Spain for their contribution. Where is Germany at this point when it comes to Franco-German leadership in European defence?
Let me start by the first part of your question or your comment. I couldn't agree more with Merz when he said that he was trying to convince Prime Minister Sanchez to commit to the investment in security and defense, because this is not an expenditure, this is an investment. You are investing in your own security, and what is even more important, if you don't mind me saying, you're investing in the collective security and defense of you and your allies. And this is what collective security means. You are supposed to do your bit. And if you do not spend what the other allies are spending, you are not being a loyal ally. It's as simple as that. And I think that he was very right. Probably the diplomatic abilities of Trump are not his at the top of the game, and he would probably not be eligible for the prize of Prince Metternich. But that's not what we're here to comment today. You know, he may be harsh, his tone may be bullyish, but he was right. Spain cannot disengage itself from the obligations that any member of the Atlantic Alliance has. We have a strategic position that is absolutely essential for the security of Europe and all of our allies. We and Portugal are some kind of, you want to call us, for lack of a better name, some kind of aircraft carrier at the far west of the European continent, and we are the southern border of the European continent. If ever, God forbid, there would be some kind of destabilization of Algeria, Morocco, or Tunisia. There is already that case in Libya, and we have seen the consequences that has brought us. In any case, what I can tell you is that Germany needs to make up its mind of how, when, and with which intensity they want to play the game of defense. Because recently, Chancellor Merz, whom I admire very much, or I have always been a fan of his policies in the past, before he became Chancellor, won the elections, was saying that he didn't see the need for such a huge jump in expenditure, defense expenditure for Germany, and that he was going to review the procurement expenditure and system that had been announced by their predecessors. That's not the right path. You can't play both sides of the court. This is very clear. You're on one side of the court trying to build a serious defense narrative and a serious defense pillar for the sake of your national interests and those of your allies, or you're not. You cannot say one thing one day and the opposite because you're sitting in the Oval Office with the President of the United States. But I do believe that there is some kind of national shift in the public opinion in Germany that very clearly sees that they have gone from a very active pacifism because of their past in the Second World War to realizing that they are the richest country in Europe, the largest economy in Europe, and that they have an obligation to defend themselves when there is an aggression from Russia to another country in Europe, and that there is a very clear aggression of Russia against European nations that belong to NATO and to the European Union through hybrid warfare. And this means that if we cannot sustain or convince Germans that they need to commit to a sustainable and constant defense effort and lead that way with the French and the UK in NATO, this new era, if you want, of European defense inside of NATO will not be possible.
Ambassador, we always value your analysis on A News. We thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to be with you.
After the break, we'll head to Baku, where Azerbaijan is outlining ambitious plans to expand renewable energy and position itself as a regional hub for green power, with new projects, investment and cross-border energy corridors taking shape. Do stay with us. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, Azerbaijan is positioning itself for the next phase of regional energy developments. At a ministerial gathering in Baku, policymakers and global energy companies detailed expansion plans that could significantly increase renewable capacity over the coming decade. Aytan Shukarova reports.
Rising temperatures, water stress and biodiversity loss in the Caspian Basin have intensified calls for coordinated regional action. Officials at the 4th ministerial meeting of the Green Energy Advisory Council in Baku described renewable energy development not only as an economic investment.
Caspian Sea is actually a mirror of wider global ecosystems. I'm sure that together we can do everything possible to make sure that the level of the Caspian Sea will rise again. Our country is actively investing in renewable energy projects. It aims at becoming a regional hub of green energy. Only 2 months ago, the largest wind energy facility in the South Caucasus was opened in Azerbaijan. The facility will help prevent over 400,000 tons of carbon emissions. This is another step forward by our country towards minimizing air pollution and increasing green energy usage.
European officials say the acceleration of renewables is now central to long-term energy security and competitiveness.
Renewable energy and energy efficiency are no longer complementary policies, they are the central pillars of a modern energy strategy in the European Union. Accelerating the deployment of wind, solar and other clean technologies. In the European Union, to reinforce our energy security, we have stepped up the pace of this green transition. Across the Union, projects in wind and solar have moved from the planning to delivery at unprecedented speed, bringing total installed capacity to roughly 600 gigawatts.
Azerbaijan's Renewable Energy Agency outlined measurable targets for the next phase of expansion.
Stage 1 envisions the construction by 2027 of solar and wind power plants with a combined capacity of up to 2 gigawatts, fully integrated into the national grid. Total projected investments for these projects are approximately $2 billion.
SOCAR Green highlighted efforts to diversify the national energy mix and develop offshore potential.
We're also working with our Chinese partners on 2 pilot offshore wind projects, each 200 megawatt. Azerbaijan has vast offshore wind capacity with a technical capacity of 157 gigawatts and commercial capacity estimated at 38 gigawatts.
International partners say energy transformation and energy security are advancing together.
Karadagh Solar demonstrated that Azerbaijan could attract international capital for renewable energy projects, building local expertise and delivering complex infrastructure at place. Today, the plant contributes to provide reliable, affordable electricity to more than 100,000 homes and operates as a part of Azerbaijan's broader diversified energy mix.
Over the last 2 decades, ACO became one of the largest private developers, investors, and operators of green projects. Our purpose remains constant: create long-term value for communities and partners, business to human.
Green energy corridors are being positioned as the infrastructure backbone for exporting future renewable capacity. The shift signals a gradual transition from hydrocarbon-driven growth toward diversified renewable generation, grid modernization, and cross-border electricity trade, with defined capacity targets extending into the next decade.
Well, Azerbaijan then is outlining an ambitious roadmap for the next phase of its energy transition, with plans to expand renewable capacity, modernise its power grid and develop green energy corridors linking the South Caucasus with European markets. Okay, joining us now is Ulvia Zulfikar, who is a political analyst here in Baku. Now, she has been following these developments and their implications for Azerbaijan's energy strategy and regional cooperation. Ulvia, very nice to see you. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Let's get into this then. Azerbaijan clearly positioning itself as a regional hub for green energy. How significant are these targets that have been announced at the ministerial meeting in Baku?
Good evening, and thank you for having me on your show. Yes, as you said, Azerbaijan has set an ambitious target to increase the share of renewable energy in its electricity generation to around 30% by the year 2030. And achieving this objective requires major international investments, technological partnership, and infrastructure modernization. What I would like to add is that Azerbaijan and the European Union are increasingly expanding their dialogue on green energy investments, which reflects the gradual transformation of bilateral energy relations. For many years, for example, cooperation was built mainly around oil and natural gas supplies, but the current discussions show that both sides are now exploring long-term cooperation in renewable energy technologies like solar, wind, and green electricity production. And this shift indicates that energy partnership between Baku and Brussels is entering a new and broader strategic phase. Recent discussions between Azerbaijan and the European Union on investments in the green energy sector demonstrate that bilateral energy relations are entering a new stage. The dialogue took place during high-level meetings in Baku, which gathered representatives of about 27 countries and nearly 60 international institutions and companies. And such broad participation indicates that cooperation with Azerbaijan is no longer limited to regional initiatives, but is increasingly becoming part of a wider international energy transformation agenda.
And Elvira, officials say that renewable projects could reach around 2 gigawatts by 2027. How transformative would that be for the country's energy mix?
Mm-hmm. So the Caspian Sea Basin is increasingly viewed as a promising renewable energy hub, particularly due to its strong offshore wind potential and vast solar resources. And international energy companies and European institutions are showing growing interest in investment opportunities in these sectors. So if large-scale renewable projects are successfully implemented, Azerbaijan may transform from a traditional hydrocarbon exporter into a regional producer of green electricity, which can be transported toward European markets. And strategic ideas discussed with Azerbaijan-EU cooperation frameworks is the development of electricity corridors that could transport renewable energy from the Caspian region to European markets. Similar to how the Southern Gas Corridor reshaped regional energy geopolitics in the previous decade, a future green electricity corridor linking Azerbaijan, Georgia, and the Black Sea region and Europe could become a new pillar of energy connectivity.
Yeah,
and expanding
Sorry,
yes.
Very interesting, these plans you mentioned. You talked about this connectivity, this discussion around green energy corridors linking Azerbaijan to European markets. A lot of potential, but how realistic are these plans, do you think?
Mm-hmm. I think they are very realistic because if the current projects and investment discussions materialize, Azerbaijan could become a central hub in a new energy architecture linking Central Asia, the Caspian region, and Europe. And such a development would significantly elevate the geopolitical relevance of the South Caucasus and strengthen Azerbaijan's position within the evolving global energy system, where renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure are becoming increasingly decisive factors in international partnerships. And the expansion of cooperation into renewable energy also strengthens political relations between Azerbaijan and the European Union. And we know that energy has historically been the central pillar of bilateral cooperations. For the European Union, Azerbaijan represents a reliable partner outside traditional supply routes, while for Azerbaijan cooperation with European institutions enhances its geopolitical and economic significance.
And Elvira, Azerbaijan's long been known, hasn't it, as a hydrocarbon exporter, but also increasingly it's becoming known for its expertise around managing that shift, managing the transition to a more diversified energy model.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as you said that for many years, Azerbaijan and EU cooperation was largely associated with the oil and gas resources and with the Southern Gas Corridor, which currently supplies natural gas to 16 or maybe 17 European countries and plays an important role in Europe's energy diversification policy. Today, however, the agenda is gradually expanding beyond fossil fuels. The European Union is actively encouraging renewable energy investments, while Azerbaijan is positioning itself as both a traditional energy supplier and a future exporter of clean electricity. For the European Union, Azerbaijan has already become an important corporate of its energy diversification policy, especially after Europe began reducing dependence on other energy resources. However, the long-term agenda of the European Union is focused on decarbonization and energy transition. Therefore, cooperation with Azerbaijan is gradually expanding toward renewable electricity, hydrogen technologies, and energy efficiency. In this context, Azerbaijan is positioning itself not only as a supplier of natural gas, but also as a future provider of clean energy.
Great to speak to you, Olvia. Thank you so much for your analysis tonight. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we're going to check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us. A very warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, from the Olympic spotlight in Italy to the misty peaks of the Caucasus, the world's best ski mountaineers are now battling extreme conditions here in Azerbaijan. Well, let's go to Shardag now, where Narchicek, Yangangrilli and the A News team are standing by with the latest from the European Championships.
As the Winter Olympics concluded in Italian Alps, all the eyes of winter sport lovers now are locked on Azerbaijan's Shahdagh mountain resort high in the Caucasus. Well, it's freezing here. The temperature is -5 degrees and thick fog covers the entire area. Visibility is extremely limited. You can barely see anything, but the cold doesn't even matter because world's top ski mountaineers gathered here as back-to-back European and World Championship unfolds in a brand new geography for the sport. This is the European round of the international ski mountaineering season, also known as Skimo. Athletes are competing across multiple age categories: seniors, U23, U20 and U18. The championships open today with the sprint event, which is short but intense. One ascent, one descent, lasting around 3 minutes. Over the coming days, we will also see mixed relay, vertical and individual races. There are several clear favorites, many of them freshly returned from Milano Cortina 2026, which wrote a historic page by adding ski mountaineering to the Olympic Games for the very first time. France comes in with a powerful squad of Olympic gold medalists, while Switzerland and Spain also look extremely strong. So what defines victory in ski mountaineering? Athletes climb on skis, then switch to boots to hike steep sections, and in the end again switch to skis for technical descents. The faster the gear change, the better the result. Each skier carries a backpack with essential equipment for those rapid transitions. And finally, Azerbaijan is represented by 5 skiers, all from nearby mountain villages. These peaks are no strangers to them. We already saw them on the track and they all were brilliant with promising performances. We will be here for the coming days to follow the races. So tune in for more updates. I'm Narchicek Jahangirli here together with Natik Mehmedov and Eves Hacıyev, A News.
Okay, back to the Middle East now. Residents in the region remain under high threat as several military dangers have emerged. Sirens are sounding, missiles are in the air, and authorities are urging everyone to head to shelters immediately. Well, our correspondent Maria Rodriguez Abaldi reports on the latest situation in Israel.
This is the current situation. As you can hear, we have an alert. The sirens are sounding, which means the missiles are on their way. The Iron Dome should intercept them once they arrive. Some fragments may fall to the ground, and it's very risky to stand outside. Even worse, if you are surrounded by buildings. We have a few minutes, maybe not. We are trying to be safe, and we must go to the shelter. A News continues to keep you informed. I'll see you in next updates. Updates: 101 missing and 78 wounded following a submarine attack on the Iranian ship near Sri Lanka. Suspicious aircraft originating from Lebanon triggered alarms in Cyprus. 2 Greek fighter jets deployed on Andreas Papandreou air base in Paphos were scrambled to counter the threat. An Israeli F-35 fighter jet has shot down an Iranian warplane over Tehran. First dogfight in history. An Iranian ballistic missile heading towards Turkey's airspace was shot down by NATO air and missile defense assets stationed in eastern Mediterranean. There were no casualties or injuries. Ahead of a potential ground incursion, the Israeli army is pursuing residents of southern Lebanon to evacuate and move north. The morning in Tel Aviv was calm until now.
Iran's Assembly of Experts is now in the process of selecting a successor to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed on Saturday when Israel and the United States launched a large-scale military campaign against Iran. Our correspondent in Tehran reports now.
I'm reporting from the ruins of a site in Iran's capital, Tehran, which was destroyed during US-Israeli attacks. These attacks killed Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, along with a number of high-ranking commanders and civilian officials. In the meantime, the Interim Leadership Council has been meeting to regulate and facilitate the process of voting on election of the next leader. As according to official reports, there will be mourning rituals to commemorate the demise and the killing of the Ayatollah Khamenei. In a new development, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman said that US-Israeli attacks intend to carry out a genocide of Iran's younger generation because of attacking Iran's civilian places, including schools, and killing school children. In a press briefing which was held in a bombed school in downtown Tehran, he also said that Iran's supreme leader never changed his religious decree or fatwa about banning a diversion from Iran's civilian nuclear program to a military aspect. Let's listen to what Foreign Ministry spokesman said.
The people of America should ask their statesmen, were our school children in Minab a threat to America's national security? What threat did the athletes of Le Merde in Fars pose to America's national security?
In another development, Iran's Atomic Energy Organization confirmed that there has been no leakage or radiation from the bomb site of Natanz nuclear enrichment facilities, which was bombed recently again on Sunday during US-Israeli attacks. Tuvrad Shiralilu, reporting for A News from Tehran.
To Afghanistan now. Turkey says it is stepping up diplomatic efforts to ease tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan after several days of deadly border clashes. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has spoken with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif as fighting between the two countries continues. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports now from Kabul.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has held a telephone conversation with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif to discuss the escalating conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan. In a statement, a Turkish Directorate of Communications said Erdogan told Sharif that Ankara is working to help reinforce the ceasefire between the two countries, a ceasefire that had previously been established through Turkey's diplomatic initiative. The Turkish president also expressed a readiness to support further efforts aimed at maintaining calm and preventing the situation from escalating further between the neighboring states. The call comes as clashes between Afghan and Pakistani forces continue for a sixth consecutive day. The latest escalation began after Pakistan carried out airstrikes inside Afghanistan, saying it was targeting militants from the TTP group. Afghanistan condemned those strikes as a violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And soon after, Afghanistan Defense Forces launched what they described as retaliatory attacks on Pakistani security outposts along the border. According to the UN, the fighting has already left more than 160 people dead or injured and forced thousands of civilians to flee their homes. With tensions still high, diplomatic efforts are now focused on reinforcing the ceasefire and preventing the conflict from widening further. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Moving to Central Asia now, and Central Asian countries are expanding evacuation options for their citizens amid the escalating conflict in the Middle East. Turkmenistan has opened additional border crossings with Iran, while Kyrgyzstan is arranging evacuation routines and flights to bring its nationals home.
Central Asian countries are taking additional measures to help their citizens leave the Middle East as tensions in the region continue to escalate. Kyrgyzstan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says its citizens can now exit Iran through Turkmenistan using several border checkpoints. The Arctic and Saras crossings are open to holders of civilian passports, while the Bajkiran crossing is reserved for diplomatic passport holders. Authorities have urged citizens to contact the Kyrgyz embassy in Turkmenistan or the Foreign Ministry for assistance. Additionally, Kyrgyzstan is preparing to receive a flight from Oman carrying 180 passengers, scheduled to arrive on March 5th. Authorities estimate that about 22,000 Kyrgyz citizens are currently in the Middle East, mostly in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, though no casualties have been reported so far. At the same time, Turkmenistan has expanded evacuation routes by reopening several checkpoints along its border with Iran, including Saras, Artik Luftabad, Gaudan Bajkiran, Akiela in Cheburun, and the Altin Asir in Cheburun. The measures allow foreign nationals to leave Iran by land as air travel in the region remains disrupted. Regional flights have also been affected. Turkmenistan Airlines has temporarily suspended services between Ashgabat and Dubai, as well as Ashgabat and Jeddah due to airspace restrictions linked to the crisis. Authorities across the region say the evacuation routes and special flights are aimed at ensuring the safe return of citizens as the security situation remains uncertain. It is Sivid Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Well, the obvious tensions around the Strait of Hormuz are raising concerns far beyond the energy market. Analysts warn that disruptions along this key maritime corridor could also affect agricultural supply chains and grain trade in Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, shipments of grain to Iran have already stalled as uncertainty grows across regional shipping routes. Our correspondent reports now from Almaty.
Restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz could impact Kazakhstan's agricultural sector. Economists warn that disruptions along this key maritime route may push fertilizer prices higher and increase production costs for farmers. For a country where grain is one of the main export commodities, such changes can directly affect the cost of production and the income of agricultural producers. At the same time, regional tensions are already affecting trade flows. Shipments of Kazakh grain to Iran have effectively been frozen for an indefinite period. Iran remains one of the key markets for Kazakhstan's grain exports. Last season, the country supplied more than 1 million tons there through routes across the Caspian Sea. The disruption is already visible in maritime logistics. According to sources cited by Reuters, Iran has stopped accepting cargo through its main Caspian Sea port, Amirabad. Shipping data from the London Stock Exchange Group shows that there are currently no grain vessels approaching Iranian ports. One vessel from Kazakhstan, the grain carrier Bellatrix, arrived near Amirabad on March 2nd. Despite being fully loaded, it has remained anchored offshore without entering the port. Grain shipments between the two countries largely pass through the Amirabad grain terminal Kish, an important hub for trade across the Caspian Sea. Kazakhstan and Iran had previously planned to expand bilateral trade to $3 billion, but according to Kazakhstan's grain union, no new grain supply contracts with Iran are currently being negotiated, while disruptions in the Middle East threaten up to 15% of global grain logistics. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
Well, that is all for Prime Time. Please do come back and join us tomorrow evening for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.